Very excited to have on the show for the first time. He is one of the voices, the lead voice you will hear if you listen to In the Circle podcast, one of the best college softball podcasts there are. You will also hear his voice if you listen to UCF softball games on ESPN+. He is Eric Lopez. Eric, welcome to the 1012, man.
It's an honor to be here for the first time. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. You are a guest I've had on my to get list, and so we're very excited to have you here today. I got a little list of things that I'd like for us to go over. And I want to start with UCF. You follow this team, you cover this team, you're very close to this team. And look, I don't think there's any argument this has been a disappointing start to the season, especially after you look at last year, getting to host a regional, getting to supers, having the incredible season they had, winning the AAC. And look, they lost a significant amount of talent and some key pieces off last year's roster. And Coach Cindy Malone, we had her on the show. She talks about her philosophy. Like, they did not hold back in their non-conference scheduling. But I think it's fair to say it's hard to say this hasn't been a disappointing start to the year. With they have had a ton of opportunities for marquee wins. I mean, they played, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like, they've played like 15-ish games against top 25 RPI opponents, and they've only been able to get a couple of them. What is it about this team? Is it a drastic drop-off, or is this a team where there's just a few key pieces have made the difference going from an incredible season to just a little underperforming?
Well, I think it's multiple things. Number one, you got to start in the circle. In softball, as you know, it always starts in pitching. You lose two great pitchers, seniors, in Kamal Woodall and Gianna Mancha. So you got a young pitching staff that had about less than 100 innings pitched combined coming into the season. So it's a young staff, and they struggle with control issues as many pitchers. So I think they've had to kind of figure out who they are as pitchers because they've never been in these big situations when you're a number one or number two. You're trying to close games out against top competition. It's a learning curve for them. Number two, one of the things that I think it's kind of been lost is UCF this year has been without Ashley Griffin, who was their starting catcher / DP last year, hit middle of the lineup, was an all-freshman performer in the American, middle of the lineup bat with good power. She hasn't played one game this year. She got hurt in fall ball and is likely out for the year. So they have not had their starting catcher all season. So now you have, as a result, new catchers to a new pitching staff. So that's been a bit of a learning curve, maybe a stiff learning curve. They've been without their leadoff hitter, at least Volpe, for the year, most of the year, with a back issue. She was supposed to be their starting left fielder. Add this, UCF this season had 5 losses via the walk-off, not run rule. Talking about dramatic walk-off losses. 4 of those 5 losses were against quad 1 teams, Alabama, Duke, UCLA, among others. So they've been a little unlucky, and they've had some injuries, and as a result, it's been a drop-off on the pitching. The offense has been not as consistent as a result. So when you combine all of those things, that's where UCF is, where they're at today, not having the results they would have liked. Coach Malone's scheduled very difficult. I believe there's a top 20 strongest schedule in the country. And the reason they did that is they wanted to host again a regional. They wanted to get to the supers. They want to get to the World Series. They also, Coach Malone, scheduled this way to get ready for what's coming next year when you go to the Big 12. And every weekend, it's a battle, a top competition. So I think it was partly those are the reasons it's kind of happened for this season. The good news is that the thing that I'm excited about is that a lot of people share your sentiment of the disappointment, and that's a good thing because people are interested in watching and tuning in. I've heard of the feedback. So it's exciting because people are interested. In years past, people are like, whatever. People are generally interested. So, but those are kind of some of the factors that have kind of been in play this season.
But I do think this is a program on the rise. I'll note on your schedule mention, according to D1 Softball, UCF had so far the number 17th ranked non-conference schedule in the country. I do think that is, as you mentioned, people paying attention. Like, this is a program on the rise to me, and they're on the rise at the right time. I think you would rather take a setback now, or a step back, let's call it that, as opposed to a setback now, the year before you enter the Big 12, as opposed to in year 1 in the Big 12. because this is a conference going through a lot of flux. Obviously, Oklahoma and Texas will be here for next season, and then they will be gone. So you're going to get one season with them. And then it feels, aside from Oklahoma State, as long as Coach Gajewski is there, like this conference is kind of wide open from that standpoint. And UCF is in a spot kind of poised to come in and immediately be a challenger in this conference. So like, I do feel like this is a program moving in the right steps. I do feel like it's a little bit of like big step forward, slight step back, but I don't feel like this is some sort of like concern of last year was a fluke. I think this is just, as you mentioned, it makes a lot of sense. You're missing some key pieces, very young on the mound. Yeah, essentially inexperienced at catcher. Like these are all things that are going to add up when you compile them all together and face the caliber and quality of schedule that UCF has so far.
And they've been unlucky. I mentioned the 5 walk-off losses. To put that in perspective, from 2019 to 2022 in the Coach Ball Malone era, UCF had only lost 2 games via walk-off in a non-run rule situation. 2. Last season, UCF won 6 games via the walk-off. That was the thing that caught people's imagination. Shannon Doherty with the walk-off against Georgia and Ole Miss and Virginia Tech. This year, UCF has won 1 game via the walk-off. Some of this is unlucky. As you know, in this sport, it's very random. Some years the ball bounces your way, some years it didn't, and it doesn't. And it hasn't for this particular team. And you wonder with a young pitching staff, does that mess with you a little bit mentally? It's psyche a little bit. So I agree with you. I think this is a small setback. And I actually think what's good about this, I think Coach Paul Malone and UCF, while they're trying to get into the tournament, trying to win a conference championship this year, you're also evaluating, all right, what do we need to address this offseason to be ready for the Big 12? We simulated a schedule that is going to be tough. They went to Stillwater recently to play Oklahoma State a couple times. What do we need to address to be right away and contend for the Big 12? Not adjust to the Big 12. We want to contend right away. What do we need to do? And I think they're taking notes there as we speak for next season as far as addressing that from a roster standpoint and what they need to do and have these players, which is a core that will be back next year. They will be used to this tough schedule now next year when they're in the Big 12 gauntlet.
Yes, Cindy Malone, of course, mentioning they've seen an increase in interest both from transfers and on the recruiting trail because that they're joining the Big 12 because of what they were able to do in the postseason last year, reaching super. So I do think UCF is in a spot right now where they are more able now than ever to be able to fill those gaps they have with quality, high caliber talent through the portal or out of high school because of what they have achieved so far and because they're joining the Power 5, which is what the same thing I've heard from Coach Eakin of Baylor and Coach Vaselli of Houston. Like they're seeing their recruiting rise because they're joining a Power 5 conference and players that they wouldn't normally have been able to get are now more interested in their programs.
100% agree. And that's why I think UCF is going to be an attractive place for players who are going to want to come from the transfer portal. Even this past year, you saw that with Chloe Evans, who they've added. The right fielder's been a stud for them out of Minnesota. Think about that. Kid from Minnesota is an all Big Ten performer, comes to UCF. That would never have happened 10 years ago. Sarah Willis comes over from Washington, a young pitcher who I think will be a big part of their plans moving forward, not just this year, but beyond. Jasmine Williams comes from Oregon. So you're starting to see that already this year, and I think more players will be interested coming in next season. So I think that'll be a big advantage. That's why I believe of all the UCF sports teams, women's soccer and softball, to me, are the 2 sports that can contend and adjust the quickest in the Big 12. Tiffany Roberts-Sahadek has done a great job scheduling. They just won the American. They have been aggressive on the transfer portal. They've competed, in the Big 12. I think they can compete in the Big 12 women's soccer, softball as well. I think the other sports at UCF is going to be an adjustment period because the jump is going to be significant in other sports like baseball, for example, or volleyball. Softball and women's soccer, the jump is not as big. It's still a jump, but not as big. And I think those 2 programs in particular are the most set up to maybe contend right away.
I do want to talk about the Big 12 with you a little bit. Obviously, as you mentioned, we had a couple of games of UCF versus Oklahoma State. UCF didn't face Oklahoma State while in Clearwater, but they continue to challenge good caliber teams. Look, as we sit here right now recording this on Wednesday, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State are the top 2 teams in every single ranking, be it RPI, ESPN, USA, D1 Softball, Softball America. So you're coming into a Big 12 conference with, I mean, two teams from the same state who are two of the best in the country. Oklahoma, I mean, I'm not going to argue is the best in the country. Like they should be number one. That team's probably going to win it all. Again, you've got Texas, at least for one more year when you guys are there, who since freshman class for them is absolutely incredible. And then you have a Baylor team who seems to have kind of rebounded after a very young down year last year. They have rebounded. They continue to get better. And look at this roster, majority of this roster will be back again next year as well, barring some wave of transfers we don't foresee. Craig Snyder seems to found some good footing there at Texas Tech in year one. Kansas seems to be kind of making some steps forward. Not sure what's going on with Jamie Pinkerton and Iowa State, but this is a Big 12 that does feel like it's on the way up. And so you're going to be adding a BYU who's a quality opponent. You're going to be adding Houston, which I know is kind of down these past couple seasons, but we have seen be a quality caliber opponent, and now UCF coming into this. I'm curious your thoughts on kind of where you think the Big 12 stands once the three new members join, be it just next year or even after Oklahoma and Texas leave, kind of in the landscape of college softball.
Well, I think right now, even when you add those teams, they're already a top three league. You know, I think the top three leagues in softball in no particular order is the Pac-12, which right now, according to the RPI, is number one this year. SEC has been number one. They're right there still, obviously, and then the Big 12. I think those are your top three leagues. You add these teams, UCF with the nucleus, Houston with the Brent and BYU. I think they're going to be in the mix for that top three, number one spot with the Pac-12 and the SEC. No worse than number three. Once Oklahoma and Texas leaves, I think the question becomes, you have Oklahoma State with what Kenny Gajewski has built there. You've got UCF. Baylor, I'm glad you brought up Baylor because I think Baylor's gotten forgotten about this, because they had a couple down years. But I spoke to Glenn Moore before the season. He loved this team, and he just loved the outlook for this team because of what you mentioned. They were super young a year ago, especially in the circle, pitching-wise. So they took their lumps, and what was interesting about Baylor is they went to the NIC and won that tournament. And I asked him why do that, and he's like, he wanted the reps for his young players. He wanted that postseason experience and growth. And it's, as you've seen, it's paid off this year for them. Their pitching staff's much improved. Their offense is good. I think Baylor will be in the mix moving forward. I think Glenn Moore knows what he's doing there. So I think the Big 12, even with Oklahoma, look, you're going to lose something with Oklahoma and Texas, obviously. Let's not kid. But I think still the Big 12 could be the third, top three, top four conference, even with their departures, because of what UCF brings to the table, what BYU. I'm a big Gordon Eakin fan. What he's done at BYU is tremendous. I spoke to him. BYU is stepping up their resources. I expect them to be in the mix. And I think Houston will get better. I can't, I think their better days are ahead there with that market. And I got to believe with them going to the Big 12, they're going to get better talent in there. They've won before. I think they'll win again. So if they get that from those three, who knows what's on the horizon down the road too, depending on what happens out west with the Pac-12. This league could still be one of the top. It could be, I think, will be one of the top conferences in the sport.
Yeah, I would say at worst, the Big 12 is battling the ACC for that number 3 spot behind the SEC, and the Pac-12 for as long as the Pac-12 is as it is. I mean, losing UCLA is definitely going to hurt, but you're still going to have Arizona State out there, Stanford, the way they're playing as well. I don't care what happens. I'll put in the Big Ten at 4th, but I mean, that's from a standpoint of weather stinks. They're the same issue with baseball for the Big Ten. Okay, so I was listening to the show in the circle, and this was your co-host brought something up for the first time I'd ever heard anybody mention quad 1, 2, 3, and 4 wins or losses in relation to college softball. Most fans know this when it comes to men's basketball. We hear about quad wins with the net. Quad 1 is awesome. 2, 3, 4. That don't make sense. We understand there's the home, road, and away. But this is the first time I've heard anyone mention quad 1 through 4 in softball. And as you have explained to me, like this is something that the selection committee utilizes when putting together their field each year. Can you just kind of explain like what the quad system is for softball for our listeners?
Yeah, I've spoken to committee chair people in softball over the last few years on the show, and then even not on the show, but the last couple of years been on the record on the show, and I've talked to people that have been in the committee just to get an idea of what they're doing, because I do a bracketology for X-rating softball, which you can check out. I've already started doing that a couple weeks in. And I've done this for a decade because nobody ever did bracketology in softball. They did it for the other sports. I'm like, why is nobody doing this? So I wanted to learn more about it to try to get a more accurate description, because a lot of schools would be blindsided not making the tournament. And they're like, why didn't we get in? And never got an explanation. So I always wanted to get people's explanation what to look for. So what the committee does, they have like a ton of data points, quote unquote, they take into effect. They do use the RPI. It's not the only thing they use, but it is the RPI is the main tool, one of the main tools they use. And what they use in that RPI is quad one wins, which are teams that are 1 through 25 in the RPI, basically. Quad twos is from 26 to 50. Some people, quad threes are all the way from to 51 to 100. Some of the committee members actually cut it off at 75 to maybe go more lenient, 2 and 3 quads. And then quad fours, which are bad losses, are 101 beyond in quad 4 losses. Strength of schedule is another thing they use, but that's what the quads are. So when they host a team, for example, UCF, one of the things that helped them in hosting the regionals last year, and just, they had a ton of top 25 RPI wins. Another thing that the committee will use as a tool is how many wins against the top 10 you got from a hosting standpoint, because they do have extra data that they'll use for hosting purposes. UCF, for example, had a win against Virginia Tech last year, who was a top 10 team. That helped them from a hosting resume standpoint. The bubble, they usually use quad ones and quad twos. What's your non-conference schedule strength? That's a non-negotiable thing. Your schedule strength overall, how you do in that quad 2, 3, 4. So that's kind of the gist of it, what they use. There's other aspects that they do use, but those are the main meat and potatoes that they use to decide on the at-large selections.
So now that I understand this and have learned about this, I have an issue with this. And let me explain what that is. I'm fine with RPI. I don't, however you want to rank the teams through 1 through 306, because there are 306 programs in D1 softball, which, well, that doesn't sound like a lot. No, it is, because we have men's basketball. We talk about how crazy and big men's basketball is. There's like 352 schools in Division 1. So it's not that big a difference. There are a lot of Division 1 softball programs. My issue with the quad system and the way they have it set up is this. In men's basketball, there is division between home, neutral, and road. And so lower ranked teams on the road are worth more than a lower ranked team at home. But we don't have that in softball. It's just a flat 1 through 306. So there's no difference whether you play a team on the road or home. Okay, fine. That's whatever. My issue is this. In men's basketball, there are 160 teams count out of the 352 as either a quad 1, 2, or 3 win at home. Out of 160 teams, that is 45% of the program. So basically 55% of D1 men's basketball counts as a quad 4 game at your home field, your home court. Cool, got it. I get that. That makes total sense. Softball, there's no home road or neutral. It's just total. 68% of the D1 softball programs currently count as a quad 4 game no matter where you play them. I understand the lack of parity in softball compared to men's basketball. I understand, I don't want to say the lack of depth of talent. I don't think that's fair, but just, the lack of parity, the lack of, the bottom is not good. And I understand all of that. What bothers me is the very notion that 68% of D1 softball programs are considered terrible. Because if you say quad 4, like our mindset has been like, that's a terrible team. You've played a terrible team. You shouldn't have a bunch of those on your resume. I have a problem by saying 68% of this sport is terrible. And I realize it would be nitpicking to say we should put that to 130 to 140, but 68% is a massive number to say you're all awful and you don't matter and you shouldn't count towards anything good. And God forbid if you lose to one of those teams.
Well, you're going to get a lot of people to support you on that. You're not the first to have brought that up. That is one of the main reasons why basketball did away with the RPI and went to the net to emphasize home court, road games, neutral, conference games. One of the things that bothers me is teams like, one of the reasons why I think UCF is going to be excited to be in the Big 12 is, UCF's going to go on the road on some of these places and get punished, even if they win. because it's considered a quad 4 games. Like Memphis is a quad 4 series on the road. Tulsa is quad 3. You're right. There is no pinpoint like we got, this is a difference there. And I agree with you. I think that's a bit harsh. The mid-major coaches have told me they hate it. They think it's an advantage to the major conferences. They think that's why the SEC gets as many teams as they do, because every game they're playing is basically quad 1 or quad 2. And that's not just mid-major coaches. Other major conferences have talked about how the SEC and the Pac-12 have had an advantage, especially the SEC, where they can bust all over the place. So you're not wrong. The problem is they haven't figured out a formula that would replace the RPI. Because I've asked the committee chair people in the past, is there been conversations of eliminating the RPI or replacing the RPI like basketball did? And, I know, for example, in the Big Ten, and talking to coaches there, the person they keep bringing up is Kevin Paga, who is a math person, has helped with the NFL schedule. He's got his own system. I've had him on the podcast this offseason where he does the KPI. And in that episode, he explains the flaws in the RPI and how his system can fit that. And he includes win-loss results. Some people now, there's other systems that include margin of victory, which is a very controversial topic. Some people like that, some don't. So nobody can really agree on a system to replace this RPI. So as a result, we're kind of stuck with this until anybody changes it. But I don't disagree with you. I think the RPI is flawed. I'm not saying that you shouldn't use it. My issue is that this is the only thing that we use, and it's the end-all, be-all. And I think that's a big mistake. And I don't like that. I think there's a lot of extreme circumstances when it comes to softball. For example, there are some teams with their number 1 pitcher is drastically different than their number 2 pitcher. There's a drop-off. So you're being punished to losing to a team that on the resume says it's not great, but if you look at when you play them and they throw your number 1, they're a different team. Why don't we have a metric for that? How do you do against certain teams when they throw their number 1s, number 2? There's none of that differences and variety that the net has. And I'm not saying that the net is perfect either. I have some issues with the net as well. But I do think the net is a positive step, direction that what basketball has done to some extent. I actually like what the basketball committee does. They use the net, but it's not the end-all, be-all. We've seen that where some of the teams' net rankings that are not great still get in, and some teams that have good nets don't get in. They use other variables. I would like, to me, the committee to have multiple things. Use Massey that uses, and things like that. Use multiple metrics. Not just the RPI, to come up to help you pick this field. And, oh, by the way, there's this whole thing called, watch the games and watch the team with your eye test as well. I think that should matter, which in softball for many years was not used.
Yeah, it does benefit the SEC. It's why we see them get like everybody in, except for the last 2 years, and they still complained because, not good South Carolina got left out. Oh, woe is them. If we want to quibble about how we rank the teams, that's fine. It's more to do to me with like the fact that you judge that large a percentage of college softball as awful, because that's what quad 4 is. And so right. You're like, okay, I don't that just doesn't then just say that. Like, we just don't think there are very many good teams. Okay. Well, especially why it's hard for teams to schedule up when I don't want that moment. I don't want these, what is that? 206 teams on my resume. And I don't want to play them. Like, I don't want that. And if you have a shorter conference schedule, like the Big 12 has been dealing with, so you have to play more non-conference games, like that does put you at a disadvantage versus the SEC, who can schedule significantly fewer non-conference, focus on playing some good teams, keep that RPA higher, even though they maybe don't have that good a record, and then get into SEC play and go and be terrible in the SEC, win 3 games, but still somehow make the postseason.
Agree 100%. The other factor is there are some good teams that the RPI would suggest they're not. And I'll give you an example. Like Oakland last year won the Horizon. They had a good pitcher, Sydney Campbell. When she throws, they've beaten good teams. When she doesn't throw, they lose. They won the Horizon. What's funny about this, UCF played them, beat them. It's a quad 4 win. No big deal. Yet one of the other metrics that the committee does use, ironically enough, is how does this team's win-loss record against the projected field? So when Oakland wins the automatic bid, UCF gets credit for that win as far as the record against the field, but yet gets punished by the RPI for playing that game. Does that make any sense?
Not any at all. None. And that just goes back to like again, yeah. I'm not trying to, be overly charitable here, and it's probably nitpicking of 30, 40 spots, but like that's 306 teams, folks. It's not, 100. There's 306 teams.
No, I agree. I think
we've got to find something better.
I agree. And I just wonder if the effort will be pushed to finding something. They did for basketball, because basketball is obviously mainstream and there's a lot of pressure there. I don't know, and the problem with softball is it gets lumped in with baseball and volleyball. So it's like, from what I'm told, well, if we've got to change it for this sport, we got to change it for all the sports. I'm like, why? Like, if one sport figures out a formula, why do we have to get approval from the other sports? It just drives me nuts. Why can't we just have each sport be independent of each other instead of, so because soccer likes the RPI, we have to use it? Like, I'm not saying that soccer does. I'm just using it as an example.
Sure.
It just drives me kind of bonkers. Trust me. And then, and especially the committees in softball, let's be real, it's gotten better. But there was a time there where people in the committee are like, do they even know what softball is? Have they even been to a softball game? It's gotten better over the last few years, but it's still not like where basketball is, where you have some basketball people in there. I would like to see more softball people in a softball committee. But that's a whole other topic.
Committee? Well, no. Who makes up the softball committee?
Some administrators, SWAs, who are basically, in charge of women's sports. They're kind of like what the ADs are on the men's side. They do have a coach or two. They also have this thing called the RAC, where they have the regional committees, and they do have some coaches input there as well, but it's all secretive. So it's kind of there, but they have their committee people that in the chair. They do have some coaches that are rep more now than they used to. So that's a good thing, but there still could be more improvement.
As softball becomes more popular, as its popularity and awareness continues to grow, I think it's just a matter of the voices have to get louder and louder. And those who push the sport and promote the sport and look to grow the sport have to become more vocal. And so it puts more pressure on the NCAA, who's going to treat softball, baseball, soccer, volleyball, all those other Olympic sports in similar light. They're not as important to them as football and basketball. And I understand from a financial revenue standpoint, I get all of that, blah, 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 blah. But it's just, you're asking the NCAA, who can barely handle what they do now, to do more. And
right.
No shocker why it's still the way it is.
Well, I'll tell you a topic that's a hot burner that I think is going to become a big topic this offseason is seeding. Softball only seeds 16 teams, like baseball, for example. Volleyball, women's soccer this fall experimented with seeding 32 teams. So instead of just the top 16, they go 17 to 32. And why that is significant is, as you know, in sports like softball and baseball and all that, they have this rule called the 400-mile radius rule, where, in other words, after, from what I was told from the committee, is they pick the 16 best teams to host. That's how they use it. That's how they claim that's what they do. After that, they have to put principles like, can this team bust to here and there? So as a result, you have an imbalanced bracket where you could have a stacked regional in one particular region and in another region be a soft regional. For example, UCF historically has gone to Florida or Florida State when they don't host because they can bust there. They never fly out. There's other examples of that. And I think that there's a talk among the sport, depending on the feedback they get from women's soccer and volleyball, that they want to go to 32. And I wonder if we're going to see that for next year, seeding to 32. I know Courtney Deifel's been outspoken, the Arkansas head coach, about that, because she feels that she's in a disadvantage because she could have a high seed. And they had teams like Wichita busing there every other year, for example. You have teams like Florida State that has an SEC team pretty much guaranteed to go to Tallahassee because just about everybody in the SEC can bus to Tallahassee. So there's been coaches that have been outspoken about that. Volleyball did it, and if the feedback is positive, I would not be surprised if you start seeing the softball go into 32 seats, which would eliminate some of that predictability. And that's significant in the Big 12 because, there's a big question about the Oklahoma State rivalry. What's going to happen? Which to me right now has become the premier rivalry in softball. And this year's matchup in Bedlam is enormous. It could decide the Big 12 championship. It could decide who's the number one overall seed. The future is uncertain on whether they're going to play or not. And part of the reason is concerns about, well, are we going to see each other in the regionals or super regionals because of geography? If you see 32 teams, that really shrinks those odds. So I think it'd be good for the sport if they do 32 seeds, you have new matchups, and you kind of get rid of this paranoia of, oh, I can't play that team because I'm going to see them in the regional because they're going to bust to my place. That would eliminate some of that. And I also eliminate some of the conspiracy theories that's out there that people believe teams are hosting because 3 teams can bust to their regional versus a team that's more deserving that cannot. That conspiracy theory is out there. The committee does not like that conspiracy. They swear that's not the case, but that conspiracy theory is just as much there as NBA conspiracy theories are out there as well. So those are some of the factors to look for this offseason.
Will be very interesting. Don't get me wrong. I love the 4 teams in one region. It's very exciting. It makes for good TV to kind of follow it that way. But I also understand creating a more fair and balanced and competitive tournament, which, again, we're trying to grow the sport. That's a big thing to do. So, Eric, I appreciate all your time today, man. You've been absolutely fantastic. Do me a favor. Where can everybody follow all the great work you do covering UCF and college softball?
Follow me on Twitter, Eric Lopez Elo. Follow our podcast, In the Circle. It's on twice a week, In the Circle SB. It's on your favorite podcast, wherever you listen to it. Subscribe, give us a 5-star review. We also have a YouTube channel there where we post a lot of video interviews as well. And then obviously you can hear me broadcasting games on ESPN Plus throughout the season with UCF games. We got UCF South Florida coming up in April, big one. Warren I-4, as they call it, April 21st through the 23rd. Got Houston. So UCF Houston will finish. Ironically, UCF and Houston will be one of the last American Conference series that both of those teams will have before going to the Big 12. So you can watch me there on ESPN Plus, among other stuff that I do. And I appreciate you having me on, sir. This has been a blast. I've enjoyed your work, so I'm glad I finally get to appear on your show.
I feel like we're going to be talking a lot more, especially once UCF is officially in the Big 12, and we'll be basically covering the same conference. Huh?
I can't wait. Can we get there already? I'm okay. I'm good with fast forwarding.
It'll get here soon enough.